Auntie Earl, we've got it covered up here. Helps tables around the side. Let's keep it looking nice for the photographer.
They told Earlene Dukes to use the side door.
All right, Marcus.
It was her mother's land. She had paid the taxes on it for 19 years. But the young man in the gray suit didn't recognize her face. Then a county car pulled up.
I need to speak with the record owner of this property, a Miss Earlene T. Dukes.
Lord, what did she do now?
Miss Earlene, from the lunchroom, Mason Middle. You don't remember me.
20 years ago, she fed a hungry boy. Today, he came back for her. But what that young man carried in his folder had been hidden for 34 years. To understand it, you have to go back to a woman the world overlooked and the quiet truth waiting to be told. This is her story. It was 4:10 in the morning, 11 hours before all that, when Earlene's alarm went off in a narrow brick house on Effie Road in Mason, Tennessee. She did not hit snooze. She never had. She lay still for a moment in the gray dark and listened to the window unit rattle, the way she always did. Then she swung her feet down to the cool linoleum and felt for her house shoes. Her knees spoke to her on the first 3 steps. They always did that now. She was 65 years old, and she had spent the back half of her life on her feet, and her feet had opinions about the front half. In the kitchen, she turned on the little light over the stove and not the big one, because the big one woke up the whole house and there was no whole house anymore. There was just her. Calvin had been gone 9 years. She still made coffee in the 4-cup pot and still poured 2 cups out of habit and still drank one and left the other on the counter to go cold. And on the bad mornings, she didn't know why she did that, and on the good mornings, she did. This was a good morning. The reunion was today. Earlene had 31 pounds of pork shoulder in the deep freeze that she had bought on sale at the Cash Saver on Summer Avenue for $1.98 a pound. She had 4 flats of collards she'd cut herself, 2 cases of pinto beans, a bushel of sweet corn from the man at the Brownsville stand, and 40 pounds of yellow potatoes she'd already washed and laid in the sink the night before. She had not been asked to cook all of it. She had been told, in a group text she was barely a part of, that Auntie Earl can handle the sides if she wants to be useful. Marcus had typed that. Her sister Beverly's boy. He typed everything for the family now. Earlene had read it twice, set the phone face down on the kitchen table, and then gone to the Cash Saver and bought 31 pounds of pork shoulder. Because a thing she knew that they did not know was that the land they were all coming to celebrate had been kept alive by the people who showed up when nobody was watching. Marcus would learn that today. He just didn't know it yet. You have to understand how Earlene lived, to understand why a card table by the propane tanks could hurt her and still not move her. She had retired from Mason Middle 2 years before, after 31 years on the line, and the district gave her a pension that came to $1,406 a month after they took out the part for her supplement. Out of that came the light bill, which ran about $90 in the deep of summer with the window unit going, and the gas, and the water, and the part of Calvin's burial she was still finishing, paying 9 years later at $38 a month to the funeral home in Covington, and the Medicare that didn't cover the pills that kept her blood pressure where the doctor wanted it. She did not own a car worth anything. She drove Calvin's 2004 Buick LeSabre, silver gone to gray, 209,000 miles on it, and she babied it the way you baby the last thing a dead man's hands touched every day. She did not waste. She kept a list on the back of an envelope of what she spent, and at the bottom of the envelope, in her square, careful hand, she kept a running total of what was left, and that number had a way of getting close to nothing by the 3rd week of the month and then climbing back up a little on the 1st. But Earlene was not poor in the way the cousins thought she was poor. She had a deep freeze full of food. She had a garden out back with tomatoes and okra and butter beans and 3 rows of greens. She had a church that loved her and a niece who called her every Sunday night without fail and grandbabies who climbed on her like she was furniture. She cooked for people. That was her thing. She cooked for funerals and weddings and new mothers and shut-ins, and she never charged the people who couldn't pay and never let the people who could pay leave without taking a plate home. She had a reputation in 3 counties for her greens and her pound cake. When somebody in Mason died, Earlene Dukes showed up at the house within the hour with a foil pan before the family even knew they were hungry. That was wealth, where she came from. That was a rich woman. She just didn't have it in a form Marcus could see, because Marcus had been raised by Beverly to read a person's worth off their car and their shoes and the zip code on their mail, and by that arithmetic, Earlene came up empty every time. The morning of the reunion, Earlene had exactly $341 left until the first of the month, and she had spent more than half of it on pork shoulder and corn and beans for a family that had told her she could handle the sides if she wanted to be useful. She did not resent it. She wanted to be useful. That was the truth and the trap of her, all in one breath. Earlene Dukes had spent her whole life wanting to be useful, and the people around her had spent their whole lives letting her, and somewhere in the arithmetic of that, a 65-year-old woman ended up cooking 31 pounds of pork for people who'd sit her at a side table. The land was going to fix that arithmetic today. She still didn't know it. To understand a Saturday in June, you also have to understand the 40 years that came before it. Earlene was the oldest of Hazel Tatum's 3 living children, born in 1959 in the front bedroom of the very house on Effie Road, where she still woke up alone. Her mother Hazel had been born in that house too, in 1931, on the same 40 acres that Hazel's own father had bought in 1948 from a white landowner named Renfro for $900 and a debt of labor that took 6 years to pay off. That was the thing about the land that the cousins in their pressed shirts liked to forget. It had cost somebody something. Hazel raised her children there and buried her husband there in 1977 in the family plot at the back of the property under the 2 pecan trees, and she lived to be 81 years old, and for the last 6 years of her life, she could not walk to the mailbox by herself. There were 3 Tatum children who could have come home for that. Only one of them did. Beverly was already gone by then, gone to Memphis and then gone past Memphis. Married to a man named Carl Sims who sold commercial insurance and then bought into a strip mall and then another. And Beverly learned to say, "our portfolio," and learned to wear linen in the summer and learned to call the home place the property out in the county, the way you'd talk about a thing you owned but didn't touch. Roy, the baby, was the sweet one and the lost one. He could play anything with strings on it, and he could not hold anything in his hands that the world handed him, including his own life. He went into the ground at the back of the property in 2003, 41 years old, and he left behind a little girl named Nadine. Earlene raised Nadine. Nobody asked her to. There was no meeting, no vote, no will. There was just a child who had nobody. And there was Earlene, who already worked the cafeteria line at Mason Middle and already drove the route home past the bus stop every afternoon. And one thing folded into the other the way bread dough folds, and after a while, you could not say where the first part ended and the second part began. Earlene was 44 when Nadine came to her, and she was the mother of that girl in every way that the word means anything. And she never once corrected anyone who called her an aunt instead of what she was. That was the kind of woman she was. She did the work and let other people keep the title. Calvin Dukes married Earlene in 1983 in the AME church on Highway 59, and he was a quiet man with big hands who had come home from Vietnam in 1971, missing a piece of his hearing and carrying things he never put down out loud. He worked 26 years at the Firestone plant in Memphis, and then 20 more as a maintenance man for the school district, and he kept every receipt he ever got in a green metal cash box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet. It was Calvin who first understood about the taxes. It was 1990, and Hazel was getting forgetful, and a letter came to the house on Effie Road that Hazel had stuffed in a drawer because she didn't like the look of it. Calvin found it when he was fixing the drawer slide. It was a notice from the Tipton County trustee. The property taxes on the 40 acres had not been paid in 2 years, and the third year would put the land on the delinquent list. And the delinquent list was where black families in West Tennessee lost 3 and 4 generations of ground to a stranger with a checkbook at a courthouse auction. Calvin did not call a family meeting. He drove to Covington, walked into the trustee's office, and paid the back taxes out of the green cash box, $804.16 in cash, which was most of 2 months of careful living for a Firestone man and a cafeteria woman. He kept the receipt. He kept every receipt after that, for 19 years, because after that first time, Calvin Dukes paid the taxes on Hazel Tatum's land every single year, and after Calvin died, Earlene kept paying them, and she kept the receipts in the same green box. Nobody else in the family knew. There was one year, 1998, when the Firestone plant cut Calvin's hours and the money got thin as paper, and the tax bill came due in October like it always did, and Earlene found Calvin sitting at the kitchen table at 11 at night with the green box open and the bills counted out and recounted, and there wasn't enough. He didn't say anything. He just sat there. And Earlene went and got the jar from the back of the closet, the one where she'd been saving for a new stove because the old one only had 2 burners that worked. And she set it on the table next to the green box, and she said, "Stove can wait. Land can't." Calvin looked at her a long time. Then he said the only thing he ever said about any of it in 26 years of paying that bill. He said, "Somebody's got to be the one." That was Calvin. Somebody's got to be the one. He paid the taxes in October, and they cooked on 2 burners for another 3 years. And he never told Beverly, and he never told Roy while Roy was living, and he never expected a thing back. Because in Calvin Dukes' understanding of the world, you didn't keep a thing alive in order to be thanked for it. You kept it alive because it was yours to keep alive, and the keeping was the whole reward. Beverly assumed the county handled it. Marcus, when he got old enough to have opinions, assumed his grandmother had left things in order. And the truth sat in a green metal box on a closet shelf, gathering receipts like a tree gathers rings, one for each year somebody quietly chose to keep the land in the family. That box is going to matter. So is the thing Hazel did in the spring of 1991, 3 weeks after Calvin paid those first back taxes, that not one soul under the white tent knew anything about. In the spring of 1991, Hazel Tatum asked her oldest daughter to drive her to Covington. She would not say why. She wore her church coat, the navy one with the gold buttons, even though it was warm, and she made Earlene wait in the car outside a low brick building on Washington Avenue while she went inside with her pocketbook clutched to her chest. When Hazel came out 40 minutes later, she was holding a folded paper, and she would not let Earlene see it, and she said only one thing on the whole ride home. She said, "I know who stayed." Earlene thought it was just one of her mother's sayings. It was not. What Hazel had done that day, with a lawyer named Pruitt and a notary and her old neighbor Mr. Calhoun standing as witness, was sign a deed. The deed moved the 40 acres and the house on Effie Road out of Hazel Tatum's name and into the name of her oldest daughter, Earlene Tatum Dukes, with Hazel keeping what the lawyer called a life estate, which meant Hazel could live there until she died, and then it was Earlene's, clean and whole. Hazel recorded that deed in the Tipton County Register of Deeds office on April 9, 1991. Then she came home, put her copy of the deed in the family Bible between the page where she'd written everyone's birthdays and the page where she'd written everyone's deaths, and she never told a soul. She did not tell Beverly, because Beverly would have argued about fairness, and Hazel was done arguing about fairness with a daughter who had not changed a single sheet on a sick woman's bed. She did not tell Roy, because Roy could not be told things you needed kept. She did not even fully tell Earlene, because Hazel was a proud woman of a proud generation, and she had decided that if you had to be told you were loved, then it wasn't love, it was a transaction, and she would not turn what Earlene had done into a transaction by paying her for it out loud. She just signed her name, and filed the paper, and slipped it into the Bible, and trusted that the truth would keep. The truth kept. For 34 years, it kept. Now come forward to that Saturday in June, and the white tent and the man in the gray suit. The man in the gray suit was Marcus Sims, 38 years old, Beverly's only son, and he had organized the entire reunion himself. He had a reason that he was telling everyone and a reason that he was telling no one. The reason he was telling everyone was that it had been 30 years since the whole Tatum family came home to the land, and Marcus wanted to honor his grandmother's memory and bring the cousins together and put up a tent and feed everybody and take a big photograph on the front steps of the old house. The reason he was telling no one was that Marcus had spent 4 months quietly working a deal. Marcus worked for a development group out of Germantown called Halpern Wexford, and Halpern Wexford wanted the 40 acres on Effie Road. They wanted to put up a distribution warehouse with a 500-space parking lot because the interstate spur was coming through 2 miles east and 40 flat acres with road frontage. 2 miles from a new interstate spur was worth a great deal more than $900 in 6 years of labor. It was worth, in the offer letter sitting in Marcus's leather folder, $2,100,000. Marcus had told Halpern Wexford that the property belonged to the family and that he could deliver it, because Marcus had grown up hearing his mother call it the property out in the county, and it had never once crossed his mind that a thing his family talked about owning might not actually be theirs to sell. He had even taken an earnest money payment, a good faith advance of $25,000, which he had used to put down the deposit on the tent and the chairs and the caterer's grills and the band, and a thing he was very proud of, which was 100 custom programs printed on heavy cream paper that said Tatum Family, Roaded N, this droned across the top. The reunion was not really a reunion. It was a closing dressed up as a homecoming. Marcus's plan was to feed everyone, walk them out to look at the land their great-grandfather bought, get them all warm and weepy and proud, and then, near the end of the day, gather the senior cousins and his mother and have them sign a one-page family agreement authorizing the sale and the split. He had the agreement in his folder, too. He had not put Earlene's name on it, because in Marcus's mind, Earlene was the aunt who cooked. He genuinely did not know that the woman he had told to use the side door was the only person on God's earth who could sign that paper. And that, more than the cruelty, more than the suit, is the thing that was going to come apart on him. Because the man was not a monster. He was just a man who had never once checked. At 11:40 that morning, the tent was full and the day was hot, and the food was the only thing about the whole affair that was real. Earlene worked the side table in the heat with two girls from her church, Sister Lutricia and Miss Odessa, who had come to help her for free because they loved her and because Odessa had said, "I'm not letting you feed 200 people by yourself so they can ignore you. I'm coming to ignore them with you." Earlene had laughed at that. It was the only time she laughed all day. The pork came off the grills falling apart. The greens had the smoke in them. The cornbread was right. People came through the line and held out paper plates and said, "Thank you, baby," without looking up. And a few of the older ones knew her and squeezed her wrist and said, "Earlene, this is your mama's recipe," and those few made the whole day worth it. But Earlene was not allowed under the front of the tent. There was a program at every seat under the front of the tent, a heavy cream-colored card that said Tatum Family, Roaded N, this is droned, and inside it Marcus had printed a family tree. Somebody handed Earlene one early in the day, before the line got busy, and she stood at the side table and read it the way you read your own name in a newspaper, looking for yourself. Hazel Tatum was at the top, the matriarch, with her dates. Below her, Beverly Tatum Sims, married to Carl Sims, and below them Marcus, with a little line about his degree and his firm. Below Hazel, also, Roy Tatum, with his dates, and below Roy, Nadine, listed as Roy's daughter. Earlene Tatum Dukes was on the program too. She found herself after a minute, in smaller print, a single line. Earlene Dukes, sister. No dates. No mention of Calvin, who'd been married into the family for 26 years and paid its taxes for 19. No mention that Earlene had raised the very Nadine listed 2 lines up under Roy's name, as if Nadine had raised herself. Sister. That was the whole of Earlene Dukes on the cream-colored card, in the smaller print, after the people who left. She folded the program in half and put it in her apron pocket, next to where the envelope of cash would later sit, and she went back to the greens. She did not show it to Odessa or Lutricia, because she knew what they'd say, and she didn't have the strength that day to talk them down off being angry on her behalf. She just kept it. She was good at keeping things. Later, that folded program would be one more thing she didn't throw away. The way her mother hadn't thrown away a torn corner of a photograph. And there is a kind of woman in this world who keeps the small paper evidence of how she was treated not to nurse it, but because she has decided, somewhere deep, that one day the record will matter, and she intends to be holding it when it does. But that was later. In the moment, she just kept it in her pocket, and she worked. She knew this because she had tried, once, around 11 o'clock, to walk up and set a fresh pan of cornbread on the head table where the family was sitting. And Marcus had stepped in front of her smooth as a door closing and said, low so, only she could hear it. "Auntie Earl, we've got it covered up here. Help's table is around the side. Let's keep it looking nice for the photographer. Help's table." The word hit a place in Earlene that was older than Marcus. It hit the place from 1996, when Beverly had a Christmas dinner at her big house in Germantown and seated Earlene and Calvin at the kitchen counter on stools while the rest of the family ate at the long table off the good china, and called it the overflow. And Earlene had eaten her Christmas dinner standing up at her own sister's counter and never said a word. It hit the place from her mother's funeral repast in 2012, when one of the Memphis cousins had handed Earlene her coat at the door and said, "Could you hang these up, sweetheart?" Because the cousin had decided, from her dress, that Earlene worked there. It hit the place that had been hit so many times it had gone smooth and hard, like a stone in a creek. Earlene looked at Marcus, at his good suit and his good teeth, and she saw her sister Beverly's exact face looking back at her 30 years younger, and she did not say what she could have said. She did not say, "I changed your grandmother's sheets when she couldn't hold her water." She did not say, "I raised the cousin you call when you need to look like you have a big family." She did not say, "Boy, you are standing on my mother's grass." She said, "All right, Marcus," and she carried the cornbread back to the side table. What she did not see, because she had already turned around, was that two people had heard the whole thing. One was her niece Nadine, 38 now, standing at the edge of the tent with a plate going cold in her hand and a look starting to build behind her eyes. The other was an old man named Mr. Calhoun, 91 years old, sitting in a lawn chair in the shade, who had witnessed a deed signed in Covington 34 years before and who said, very quietly, to no one, "We'll see." Here is the part that tells you who Earlene Dukes was. At about noon, Marcus came hurrying around the side of the tent in a sweat, patting his suit pockets, because the band wanted their second half cash and the photographer wanted his balance, and Marcus had carried it all in an envelope, and the envelope was gone. He'd had it in his inside jacket pocket. He was sure of it. $1,900 in 20s and 50s, the cash float for the day. He was nearly white with panic, and he came around the corner and looked at the helps table, at the 3 church women and the foil pans, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Did anybody back here pick up an envelope? White envelope?" It had cash in it. The way he said it, with his eyes going from Earlene to Lutricia to Odessa, made the meaning plain. He was not asking if they had found it. He was asking which one of them had taken it. Odessa set down her serving spoon very slowly. Lutricia opened her mouth. And Earlene, who had found that exact envelope 20 minutes earlier lying in the grass by the propane tanks where it had slipped out of Marcus's jacket when he bent to plug in the band's amplifier, reached into her apron pocket and took it out and held it across the table. Every dollar was in it. She had counted it, because that was the kind of woman she was, so that if a single bill was missing, she could say where it went. "It was in the grass by the tanks," she said. "I was going to bring it up to you when the line slowed down. Count it. It's all there. 1,900. Marcus took the envelope. He did not say thank you. He thumbed through the bills fast, right there in front of her, counting. And when he saw it was all there, a flicker went across his face that was not relief and not gratitude, but something closer to suspicion that there had been nothing to find at all. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, okay." And he turned and walked back to the band. Odessa watched him go and said something under her breath in church language that was not quite a prayer. Earlene picked the serving spoon back up. "He's young," she said. "His mama raised him to be scared of the wrong things." She believed that, too. That was the worst part. She wasn't being noble. She actually felt sorry for him. That is the woman they sat at the side table. That is the woman whose name was on the deed. The afternoon went on, and Earlene worked. That was the thing about Earlene that the family had always mistaken for weakness. After they wounded her, she did not stop moving. She did not go sit in the Buick and cry, though she could have, and a younger woman would have, and nobody would have blamed her. She refilled the greens. She swapped the empty cornbread pan for a full one. She wiped the long table down and set out fresh ice for the tea, and when the photographer came around the side to grab a bottle of water, she handed him 2 and asked if his people were eating, because his people are always the ones who don't get fed at these things. She watched the family take their pictures on the front steps of her mother's house without her in the frame. She was not in the photograph. Again. 36 years after they tore her out of the last one, here she was, standing 20 feet away with a serving spoon, watching them arrange themselves on her own porch. Marcus put his mother in the center. He put the Memphis cousins on the steps. He waved Nadine in, and Nadine went, because Nadine didn't know yet what she was going to know, and afterward Nadine would not forgive herself for the way she'd smiled in that picture while her mother stood by the propane. Earlene watched it all, and her face did not change. A church dress she'd ironed the night before was hanging in the back of the Buick on a hanger, in case she got a minute to change out of her cooking clothes and sit down like a guest before the day ended. She never got the minute. She knew, watching the photograph, that she wasn't going to get the minute. So she put the spoon back in the greens, and she stood at the side table in the heat, and she did the thing she had done at a kitchen counter in 1996, and at a coat closet in 2012, and in 100 rooms in between. She stayed. She didn't know that staying was about to mean something. She just knew it was the only thing she'd ever been any good at. At 2:15, the county car came up the gravel lane. It was a plain white Ford with a Tipton County seal on the door, and it did not belong at a family reunion, and everybody under the tent felt it not belong. The man who got out was young, maybe 32, in a regular suit and not an expensive one, with a leather folder under his arm and the slightly lost look of a person walking into a party that isn't his. Marcus went to meet him, smiling his closer's smile, hand already out, because Marcus assumed any man with a folder was coming to make him richer. "You must be from the title company," Marcus said. "We weren't expecting you till Monday, but—" "I'm sorry to interrupt your event," the young man said. "My name's Theo Mercer. I'm with Bluff City Title and Abstract. We're handling the search for the Halpern Wexford transaction. There's a problem with the chain of title I needed to discuss in person before anybody signs anything Monday." He looked around the tent. "And I need to speak with the record owner of the property, a Miss Earlene T. Dukes." The tent did not go silent all at once. It went silent in pieces. First the family table, where the name landed like a dropped plate. Then Beverly, in her white hat, lowering her fan. Then the cousins, turning to each other, mouthing the name. "Earlene? Earlene?" "There's some confusion," Marcus said, and his voice had changed, gone tighter. "The owner is the Tatum family. My grandmother, Hazel Tatum. I'm the family representative. Whatever you've got, you can hand it to." "Hazel Tatum hasn't owned this property since 1991, Theo Mercer said. He said it gently, like a man setting down something fragile. "She deeded it, with a reserved life estate, on April 9th, 1991. Recorded, Book 412, page 88, Tipton County. Hazel passed in 2012, which extinguished the life estate. Title's been fully vested in the grantee for 13 years. He paused. "The grantee is Miss Earlene Tatum Dukes. I have to speak with her, sir. She's the only person who can sell this land. Or not sell it." Then Theo Mercer turned away from Marcus, and he scanned the crowd, and his eyes went past the family table and past the cousins and landed on the side of the tent, on a 65-year-old woman in an apron standing very still behind a foil pan of greens. And the lost look went off his face, and something else came on it, something soft and astonished. "Miss Earlene," he said. He said it like a boy. "Miss Earlene, from the lunchroom, Mason Middle. You don't remember me." She did, though. That was the thing. She remembered all of them. She remembered the skinny boy in 2003 with the free lunch card he was ashamed of, who used to come through her line with his eyes down, and how she used to slide an extra roll onto his tray and tell him it was going to get thrown out anyway, so he'd take it, and how some weeks his card came up empty and she covered it herself out of her apron. $1.50 here, $1.50 there, because of hungry. Child in her line was not a thing Earlene Dukes could walk past. She remembered telling that particular boy, the one with no people, "You're smart, baby. Smart gets you out of here. You keep your head in those books." She just never thought she'd see what the books got him. What she remembered, standing there in her apron with the whole tent watching, was a particular Tuesday in the fall of 2004. Theo had come through her line and his card had come up empty, and he'd gone red to the ears and started to put his tray back. The whole tray, because he didn't have $1.50 and he wasn't going to stand there and be seen not having it. Earlene had reached across and pushed the tray back at him. "Card reader's acting up today," she'd said, loud enough for the kids behind him to hear, so it sounded like the machine and not the boy. "Go on, baby. Eat." It wasn't acting up. She'd covered him out of her apron. $1.50, like she did 2 or 3 times a week for 2 or 3 kids, and she never kept track, and she never told a soul, the same way Calvin never told a soul about the taxes, because that was the family she'd married into and the family she'd been born into. The kind that keeps things alive in the dark and doesn't send a bill. 20 years and 1,000 trays later, one of those kids walked into a tent on her own land with the one piece of paper that could give her back her name. She did not know yet that he was the one. She only knew his face. "Theodore," she said. "You went and got tall." And Theo Mercer, attorney at law, stood in the middle of a white tent on Effie Road with a leather folder under his arm and his eyes shining, and he could not, for a second, say anything at all. They moved it inside the house, the way serious things move inside. The old house on Effie Road had a front room with Hazel's furniture still in it under plastic and a smell of dust and cedar and thyme, and they gathered there. Earlene, Theo Mercer, Marcus, Beverly, Nadine, old Mister. Calhoun walking slow on his cane, and Sister Lutricia who came because Earlene reached back and took her hand and would not let go. Marcus tried to keep control of the room. It was the only thing he knew how to do. "This is obviously some kind of clerical error," he said. "My grandmother would never have cut out her whole family. She'd never have given it all to." He stopped himself. He had been about to say a word, and even he could hear that the word was going to ruin him, so he changed it to one person. "This isn't how she was. There's got to be a later will. Something." "There's no later will that touches this land," Theo said. "A will couldn't undo this anyway. She deeded it while she was alive. It was hers to give, and she gave it in front of witnesses and recorded it. It's about as clean a transfer as I've ever pulled." He opened the folder. "And there's something else. The property taxes." He laid out copies. 19 years of tax receipts from the Tipton County trustee. The very receipts that lived in a green metal cash box on a closet shelf. Except these were the county's own carbon copies, pulled from the records, and every single one of them had been paid by and made out to Earlene T. Dukes or Calvin O. Dukes. For 19 years, Theo said, somebody quietly kept this land off the delinquent rolls, out of their own pocket. If they hadn't, the county would have sold it for back taxes a long time ago, and none of you would have a thing to fight over. He looked at Marcus, not unkindly. "There is no Tatum family land, sir. There's land one person in the Tatum family refused to let die, and then fed all of you on it today." The room was very quiet. The plastic on Hazel's couch crackled when Beverly sat down on it without meaning to. She had gone the color of ash under her white hat. "Earlene?" Beverly said. Her voice had a crack running through it. "Earlene, you knew? All this time, you knew, and you let me." She couldn't finish it. She was thinking about a Christmas dinner and a kitchen counter and 2 stools. They were all thinking about something. You could see it going around the room, each person arriving at their own private stool. "No," Earlene said. "I didn't know about the deed. I never saw it. Mama never told me what she did that day in Covington." She looked at her own hands. "I knew about the taxes because Calvin started paying them and I just kept on after he passed. I figured it was the right thing. The land needed it and nobody else was doing it." She looked up. "I didn't pay them because they were mine. I paid them because they were ours. There's a difference. I just didn't know I was the only one who thought so." Marcus made a sound that was supposed to be a laugh. "Okay, we'll get a lawyer. Our own lawyer. Handwriting people. There's no way my grandmother." "Marcus," said Mr. Calhoun. The old man had not spoken since he came in the room. He was 91, and he spoke slow, and the whole room turned to him the way a room turns to age when age finally decides to talk. "Marcus, I drove your grandmother to Covington that day," Mr. Calhoun said. "April of 91. I sat in the lawyer Pruitt's office, and I put my name on that paper as a witness, and so did Pruitt's secretary, and the notary stamped it. Hazel knew exactly what she was doing. She said it to me on the ride home, plain as I'm saying it to you. He thumped his cane once, soft, on the floor. She said, 'Calhoun, I'm giving it to the one who stayed.' Then she said, 'Don't you tell a soul. Let them act right or don't, but I want to know who acts right without knowing there's a paper.' He looked around the front room, at all of them. 'Well, now you know there's a paper.' The silence after that had a different weight. It was the silence of people who had been graded on a test they didn't know they were taking, and were just now getting the scores back. Nadine was the first one to move. She had been standing by the window the whole time, the niece Earlene raised, 38 years old, a school nurse over in Brownsville with 2 kids of her own and a marriage and a mortgage and a life that existed because one woman had folded her in like bread dough in 2003. She crossed the room and she got down, all the way down, on her knees in front of Earlene's chair, the way you do for the people who raised you, and she put her face in Earlene's apron and her shoulders started going. "You ate at the counter," Nadine said into the apron. "At Aunt Bev's. At Christmas. I was little, but I saw it. You and Uncle Calvin on those stools, and I never said nothing. All these years I never said nothing because everybody acted like that was just where you went." She lifted her wet face. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. I let them put you at the side table at your own table." "Baby," Earlene said. She had a hand in Nadine's hair. "Baby, you were 6 years old at that Christmas. You don't apologize for what they did when you were 6. I'm not 6 now," Nadine said. And she got up and she turned around, and she looked at Marcus, and she was not crying anymore. "You told her to use the side door," Nadine said. "You called her help, in front of the photographer, so it'd look nice." Her voice was shaking, but it did not stop. "This is her house, Marcus. You've been standing in her front yard all day, selling her grass to a warehouse, and you sat her at a card table by the propane." "I didn't know," Marcus said. And it was the truth, and it was the worst possible defense, and everyone in the room understood both of those things at the same time. "You didn't know," Nadine repeated. "You didn't check." "You never check. You looked at her apron and you knew everything you wanted to know." I'll tell you what Marcus did next, because it's the part that matters, and it's the part the architecture demands, and the part that's true to how pride actually dies. He did not collapse. He doubled down. Because Marcus, in that front room, did the math that men like Marcus do, and the math was very bad. The $25,000 of earnest money was not in an account. Most of it was in tents and chairs and a band and 100 cream-colored programs. He had told Halpern Wexford he could deliver a $2 million parcel by Monday, and he had told his bosses, and there was a closing on a calendar, and there was a version of Marcus's life that ended on Monday if this paper was real. So Marcus reached for the only thing he had left, which was the family story he'd been raised on. The story where he was the one who'd made something of himself and Earlene was the one who hadn't. "You want to talk about who showed up?" Marcus said, and his voice climbed. "I'm the one who organized all this. I'm the one who got everybody here. I'm the one who's been out here for 4 months getting this deal done so this family could finally get something out of this dirt. You know what this land's worth? You want to keep it a field? You want to keep cutting grass on $2 million because some old man remembers a car ride?" He pointed at Earlene, and his hand was shaking. "She doesn't even know what to do with it. She'll lose it. She'll let it rot like she's let everything." "That's enough," Beverly said. It came out of her like something tearing. Beverly Tatum Sims had sat on the plastic-covered couch through the whole thing, gray-faced, and now she stood up, white hat and linen and all, and she was crying in the ugly way, the way that ruins your face, and she looked at her son like she was seeing the back of his head for the first time. "That's enough, Marcus. You sound like me." She said it like a confession. "You sound exactly like me, and I am so ashamed of how I sound." She turned to her sister. "Earlene, I put you at the counter. Christmas of '96. I told Carl it was the overflow, and it wasn't the overflow. There were 2 empty seats at that table, and I let you stand up in my kitchen because I had decided, somewhere in my head, that you were less than me because I had a brick house in Germantown and you had Mama's old place out in the county." Her voice broke all the way. "And the whole time it was your house. The county was your house. You had it the whole time and you never once said it to my face, even when I deserved to have it thrown at me. Why didn't you ever throw it at me?" "Because I didn't know I had it to throw," Earlene said. "And because you're my sister. And because Mama would have been ashamed of both of us if I'd turned her land into a thing to win a fight with." She stood up out of the chair, slow, with her knees talking to her. "Sit back down, Bev," she said. "You're going to ruin that hat." And Beverly laughed, a wet, broken laugh, and sat down, and that was the moment the war ended in that family, even though one person in the room hadn't surrendered yet and wouldn't for a long time. Word got out of that front room, the way word always gets out, through the cracked door and the open window and the cousins pressed up close, pretending to fan themselves. And by the time Earlene came back outside, the whole tent knew, and the whole tent had rearranged itself around the knowing. There was a cousin named Wendell out there, 50-some years old, who ran a small landscaping outfit in Memphis and had 2 trucks and 6 employees and a chip on his shoulder that everyone assumed was just Wendell being Wendell. Wendell came up to Earlene by the side table, and he had his cap in his hands. "Cousin Earlene," he said, "I owe you a thing I've been carrying 3 years." He turned the cap around. "Marcus brought me in on a deal in 2022. A flip over in Fraser. Told me put in my money. Told me we were partners. 50-50. Shook my hand on it in front of his mama." Wendell's jaw worked. "When it sold, wasn't no 50-50. There was a paper I'd signed that didn't say what he told me it said, and I got back about 1/3 of what I put in, and when I went to him about it, he looked at me just exactly the way he looked at you today, like I was something that got on his shoe." He looked down. "I didn't say nothing to the family because everybody thinks Marcus walks on water, and I figured they'd say Wendell can't read a contract. So I just ate it. 3 years I ate it." He put the cap back on. "But I watched him send you around the side today, And then I watched a lawyer walk in here and tell the whole world he tried to sell out from under a woman who'd been paying the taxes since before he could drive. And I just want you to know you ain't the only one. And I'm sorry I stayed quiet so long. Quiet's how he gets away with it. Earlene reached out and squeezed his wrist, the way the old people squeeze your wrist. You're not the only one who was quiet, baby, she said. I had 34 years of quiet in a Bible. Quiet's not the sin. The sin is being loud about the wrong things. She let go of his wrist. You eat yet? Wendell laughed, surprised, the way Beverly had laughed. No, ma'am. Go get you a plate, she said. It's good. I made it. And Wendell went and got a plate, and he wasn't the last one to come tell Earlene a thing he'd been carrying about Marcus that day. There were 2 more before the sun went down. That is the other thing about a man who runs people over quietly. The people he runs over remember. They wait. And the day the truth walks in under a tent, they all stand up at once, and the man finds out exactly how many bridges he burned in the dark, thinking nobody was keeping count. Somebody was always keeping count. She was at the side table the whole time. Marcus's deal died on a Tuesday, 4 days later, in a conference room in Germantown. Theo Mercer's title opinion was airtight, and Halpern Wexford's lawyers read it in about 90 seconds. And the deal Marcus had built his whole year on came apart, because you cannot sell a man a field that belongs to a lunchroom cook who has no intention of selling it. Halpern Wexford wanted their $25,000 back. Most of it was gone, in tents and a band and 100 programs. And the part that was gone, Marcus had to make right out of his own pocket and alone. And his bosses had questions about how a senior associate had spent 4 months and the company's name pursuing a parcel he never confirmed his family owned. And those questions did not have good answers, and Marcus Sims was, by August, no longer at Halpern Wexford. He told people he'd left to start his own thing. Everybody knew. That is how pride pays for itself. Not in lightning, in a Tuesday. But that's not the end of Marcus in this story, and I want to be honest about him, because the easy thing would be to leave him in the ditch and let you enjoy it. He did not apologize that summer. He didn't apologize that fall. He stayed away from Effie Road, and he told a version of the story where he was the victim of an old woman's secret, and some people believed it, and Earlene let them, because Earlene had learned a long time ago that you cannot drag a person to the truth. You can only leave the door open and keep the porch light on. She kept the porch light on for Marcus a long time. We'll get back to whether he ever walked up to it. That night, after the last car crunched down the gravel and the tent company came and took the tent and left the grass flattened in a big pale rectangle like the ghost of a thing that had happened there, Earlene was alone in her mother's house. She got out the family Bible. It lived in the front room, on the lamp table, a big black Bible with a cracked spine and Hazel's maiden name pressed in gold gone, almost smooth, and Earlene had dusted around it for 13 years without ever opening it past the birthday page, because the death page was in there too, and she had written some of those entries herself and did not need to read them. But Theo had said the deed was in there. Mr. Calhoun said Hazel had filed the county's copy but kept her own, and Earlene wanted, that night, to hold the paper her mother had signed. She found it where Hazel had left it 34 years before, between the births and the deaths, which was exactly where her mother would have put a thing that was both. The deed was there. Her own name, Earlene Tatum Dukes, typed on a county form, and her mother's signature under it, the real one, the one Earlene had seen on report cards and church envelopes her whole growing up, and folded inside the deed was a letter. It was 1 page, in Hazel's hand, the cramped, careful hand of a woman who'd learned to write in a one-room school and never wasted a line, and it was dated the same week as the deed, April 1991, and it had no envelope and no address because it had never been meant to be mailed. It had been meant to be found. Earlene sat down in her mother's chair under the lamp and read it. Her mother had written that she knew what Earlene and Calvin had done with the back taxes, even though they thought she didn't, because the trustee's office had called the house to thank her, and she had figured out the rest. She had written that she was old and tired, and that she had 3 children, and only one of them came when she fell. Only one of them changed the bed. Only one of them sat with her in the dark when she was scared, and that she had decided a long time ago that she was not going to leave the land to the loudest. She was going to leave it to the truest. She had written, "I am not telling you while I am living, daughter, because if I tell you, then every kindness you do me from here on you will wonder, did you do it for the land? And I do not want to take your kindness and turn it into pay. You earned this without knowing, and that is the only way a thing like this is ever really earned. And at the bottom, the last line, the line that broke Earlene clean in half at the kitchen table at 65 years old. You were always going to be the one. I knew it when you were 6. Some children you can just tell. The world will look right past you your whole life, Earlene. But the land will know who stayed, even after I am gone and cannot say it for you. Let the land say it. Earlene put the letter down on her knee. She sat in her mother's chair in her mother's house for a long time, and the window unit rattled, and outside the crickets came up, and the pale ghost rectangle where the tent had been faded into the dark. She had spent her whole life not being told she was the one. It turned out she had been told, in 1991, in a letter folded inside a deed, and it had just taken 34 years and a stranger with a leather folder to put the words in her hands. She did not feel triumphant. She felt seen. That was a different thing, and a deeper one, and it was the only reward she had ever actually wanted. She read the last line one more time. Let the land say it. Then she folded the letter back into the deed and put the deed back into the Bible, between the births and the deaths, where her mother had kept it, and she turned off the lamp. First, the land. Earlene did a thing with the 40 acres that nobody expected and that told you everything about her. She kept it. She turned down $2,100,000, and then she turned down a second offer that came sniffing around at 2.5, and she sat in Theo Mercer's office on a folding chair and said, I don't want to be the one who sold what Granddaddy worked 6 years to buy. I'd rather be tired and own it than rich and have given it away. But she was not foolish, and she was not sentimental in the way that gets families wiped out a generation later. With Theo's help, and with a lawyer Theo brought in who did this kind of work for families like hers, Earlene put the 40 acres into a family land trust. She wrote it so the land could never be sold out from under the family by any one person ever again, the way Marcus had nearly done. She wrote it so that the home place stayed the home place. She wrote it so that the small piece of frontage along the road, the part nearest where the interstate spur was coming, could be leased, not sold, and the lease money would fund 2 things. The first was the upkeep of the land and the house and the family plot under the pecan trees in perpetuity, so that no Tatum would ever again get a letter from the trustee and have to pay it in cash out of a green box. The second was a scholarship. She named it the Hazel Tatum and Calvin Dukes Memorial Fund, and it paid lunch debt and book money for kids at Mason Middle and the high school, the skinny kids with their eyes down and their free lunch cards, the Theo Mercers nobody's looking at yet. She made Theo a trustee. She made Nadine a trustee. She left a seat open and unfilled, and when Theo asked her who it was for, she said, somebody who's not ready yet. She was talking about Marcus. She didn't say so. The home place got fixed up that summer and fall, slow, the way real things get fixed. The money for it did not come from selling anything. It came from the first lease payment on the road frontage, which a smaller, decent company paid to put up a fuel and food stop near where the spur was coming, on a lease that would end and revert and could never become a sale. Theo wrote the lease so tight that Earlene joked he must have stayed up nights trying to find a way to disappoint a warehouse. The first check from that lease was the first money Earlene had ever held in her hand that came off the land instead of out of her pocket. She did not buy herself anything with it. She paid off the last of Calvin's funeral, the $38 a month she'd been sending to Covington for 9 years, all at once, the whole remaining balance, and she sat in the funeral home parking lot afterward in the silver Buick for a while, not crying exactly, just sitting, because there are debts you carry so long that paying them off feels less like relief and more like the end of a conversation you'd been having with somebody who was gone. Then she went home and started on the porch. Nadine's husband and 2 of the younger cousins tore off the rotten front porch and rebuilt it board by board, and Earlene painted the new floorboards gray, the same gray her daddy had used, because some things you keep the same on purpose. The window unit got replaced with central air because Earlene was 65 and her knees had opinions, and she had decided she was allowed to be cool in her own house at last. The little back bedroom that had been Roy's, and then had been Nadine's when she was small, got painted a pale blue and made into a room for Nadine's kids when they stayed over. The grandkids Earlene was not supposed to name in this telling and won't, except to say that they ran through that house in the summer like it had always been waiting for them, which it had. And in the front room, over the mantel, a photograph went back up on the wall. Here is the thing about that photograph. For years, there had been a family picture in Hazel's front room, the big one from a Tatum gathering in 1989, everybody on the front steps in their Sunday clothes. But it had always had a corner torn off, the bottom right corner, and nobody talked about it. And Earlene had wondered her whole life what used to be in that corner. When they cleaned out the old chifforobe that fall, Nadine found the torn corner. It was in an envelope, in the family Bible, tucked against the page with the deed. Hazel had kept it. The corner was Earlene and Calvin. In 1989, somebody, and everybody had a guess about who, had torn Earlene and Calvin off the bottom of the family photograph, the cafeteria worker and the maintenance man, the ones who didn't dress as fine, and the picture had hung on the wall for 36 years with a hole where they used to be. Hazel had found the torn corner, and she had not thrown it away, and she had not made a scene, and she had not put it back, because Hazel did not fix things by force. She had just kept it, in her Bible, against the deed, where the truth was, waiting on the day somebody would want it back. Nadine took both pieces to a man in Memphis who restored old photographs, and he made the picture whole again, seamless, so you could not tell it had ever been torn. It hangs over the mantel on Effie Road now. Earlene and Calvin are at the bottom right, exactly where they always were, looking like they belong there, because they always did. I told you we'd get back to Marcus. He came up the porch steps in November, the new gray porch steps he had not helped build, on the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and he stood on the bottom step a long time before he knocked, like a man who'd practiced something in the car and was already forgetting it. Earlene saw him from the window. She'd known he'd come eventually. She'd kept the porch light on. She opened the door and she did not say anything, because she had learned that the people who need to talk will fill a silence, and the people who need to apologize will drown in one, and she wanted to see which one Marcus was. He stood on the new gray boards in the cold and he said, "I lost the job. I guess you heard. I heard. And Mama won't hardly talk to me. And the cousins look at me like..." He stopped. He'd come to make it about him again. He could hear himself doing it. He pressed his lips together and tried once more, from a different place. "Auntie Earl, I called you help. At your own grandmother's land. In front of everybody. And then you found my money in the grass and you brought every dollar of it back, and I checked it in front of you like you'd steal from me." His voice did something then that voices do when a man hits the real thing under all the other things. "You fed me too. When I was little, before all the money, before Mama got the big house, when we'd come out here, you fed me out of your kitchen, and I didn't even remember that until this summer. You fed me and I called you help." Earlene let the silence sit a second longer. Then she stepped back from the door. "You eaten?" she said. "That was all. You eaten." It was the most that woman could give, and it was everything. And Marcus Sims, 38 years old, broke down on a porch in Mason, Tennessee, because his aunt asked him if he'd eaten. She fed him at the table. Not the side table. There was no side table in that house. There was one table, her mother's table, and she put a plate in front of him. And she did not make him grovel, and she did not pretend it didn't happen either. Over the meal, she told him she was holding a trustee seat open. She told him it had conditions. He'd have to learn the work, the boring work, the upkeep, and the taxes, and the easements, and the scholarship paperwork, the kind of work that doesn't close in 90 days for a commission, the kind that takes 34 years and nobody claps. She told him the seat would still be empty in a year, and in 2, and that it would be his when he could sit in a room and not need to be the most important person in it. "Why?" Marcus said. "After all that, why would you do that? Because your grandmother kept a torn-off corner in her Bible for 23 years instead of throwing it away," Earlene said. "She kept it because she believed people could come back to where they belonged. I'm not smarter than my mama. I'm just going to believe what she believed." She refilled his tea. "Eat, Marcus," she said. "It's getting cold. There's one more thing, and then I'll let you go." That spring, a year after the white tent, the family came back to Effie Road. And it was a real homecoming this time. No developer, no closing dressed up as a reunion, just the Tatums on their own land for nothing but each other. They ate on the new porch and out in the yard. There was no head table and no helps table. There was Earlene's mother's long table dragged out into the grass, and Earlene sat at the head of it, because Beverly put her there and would not hear otherwise, and Nadine fixed her plate before anyone else got served and set it in front of her first. Served first. At 66 years old, in an apron she didn't have to wear because nobody was making her cook, at the head of her mother's table on her grandfather's land, Earlene Dukes was served first. She didn't make a speech about it. She wasn't that kind. She just sat there a minute with her hands folded and her eyes closed before she picked up her fork, and the people who loved her gave her that minute, and old mister Calhoun, 92 now and slower but still coming, raised his sweet tea about an inch off the table toward her. Just an inch, just for her to see. She nodded back at him. Beverly sat at Earlene's right hand that day, where the older sister used to sit, and the younger sister had spent 40 years thinking she belonged. They were not all the way healed, the two of them. There were still things that lived between them that a year couldn't reach. A Christmas counter, a coat closet, a torn photograph nobody ever did own up to. But Beverly fixed Earlene's plate when Earlene's knees wouldn't let her get up fast enough, and she did it without being asked, and she did it every time after that, for the rest of the years they had. And some apologies are spoken, and some apologies are just a plate brought to you again and again until the bringing becomes the words. Marcus came that day too. He sat down near the foot of the table, not because anyone put him there, but because he chose it. And he ate quiet, and he washed dishes after with the young cousins, his good shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbow. And when one of the grandbabies asked him who he was, he said, "I'm one of Aunt Earlene's people," and left it at that. It was the truest thing he'd said about himself in years. He was a year into the boring work by then. The trustee seat was still empty. He was getting closer to being able to sit in it. And down at the back of the property, under the two pecan trees, two graves had new markers that spring. Hazel's old one had been cracked for years and finally got replaced. And next to the family stone, a small new one had gone in that had not been there before. A marker for Calvin Dukes, U.S. Army, Vietnam, who had paid $804.16 in cash one day in 1990 and never once told anybody he'd saved the family. His marker had a line on it that Earlene chose herself. It said, H.E. Stay D. That was the whole epitaph. 2 words. She figured Calvin would have liked it that way. He never used 3 words when 2 would do. After everybody went home that night, Earlene sat alone on the new gray porch in the dark with the last of her tea going warm in the glass, and the land was quiet around her the way it had been quiet for her whole life, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel like being left out. It felt like being home. She thought about the green metal box on the closet shelf, 19 years of receipts. She thought about a navy coat with gold buttons and a folded paper her mother wouldn't let her see. She thought about a torn corner that found its way back to the wall. And she thought, the way you do when you're old enough to know it's true. The people who keep a family alive are almost never the ones at the head of the table. They're the ones at the side door, with the foil pans, who came anyway. Sometimes the truth waits 34 years in a Bible to say so out loud. Earlene finished her tea, and she turned off the porch light, because for once there was nobody left to wait up for. Everybody she loved was already inside. Sometimes the people the world overlooks are carrying the strongest hearts. Kindness has a way of finding its way home, often when no one is looking, often long after we stop expecting it. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe for more unforgettable family stories. We read every single one.